Peter B. Collins with news and comment. It's Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. Elizabeth Warren has disappointed me with her desperate attacks on Bernie Sanders. Time to be centerpieces of the Democratic debate in Iowa tonight, and just 3 weeks before the Iowa caucuses are held. Now, this started, and we reported on it yesterday, over the weekend, on Sunday. Senator Warren went public, and she said that Bernie Sanders people were trashing her. And then yesterday, through some sort of a leak that then Senator Warren confirmed of a private conversation that she held with Sanders more than a year ago. Well, the media is all over it now. They smell something, and the attack dogs are digging in. Now, the context for this is that Bernie Sanders is climbing in the polls, and the polls are volatile right now. I want to concede that there isn't a clear pattern, except that Sanders is on the rise. Biden is holding his own in national polls, but it's been quite fluctuating in Iowa. And in all of this, Elizabeth Warren has slid to third place, and she's under a lot of pressure to turn that around. So, according to the latest national poll from Hill Harris, 19% support Sanders, 29% Biden, 11% for Warren. Buttigieg has slipped. Bloomberg has slipped, and he peaked at 11% nationally just about 2 weeks ago. Now, I want to caution that this poll has a pretty small sample size. I drilled down to page 3 of the summary, and only 451 people were consulted. Now, later they show a sample size on some of the questions of about 1,000, but for a national poll, that is, well, not very solid. So yesterday's, I don't want to over characterize this, but Elizabeth Warren commented on what had been a private conversation with Bernie Sanders. It appears that CNN got wind of it, and she then confirmed it. But if it was a private conversation, it's unclear to me why Warren confirmed it or gave it any further credence. It happened 13 months ago. This is a very selective leak. I think it shows desperation on the part of the Warren campaign. And after confirming it, she wrote this: among the topics that came up in this meeting in December of 2018 was what would happen if Democrats nominated a female candidate. In the voice of Warren, I thought a woman could win. He disagreed. Now, this is being described as sexist on the part of Bernie Sanders. But this was a private meeting between the two of them. So this becomes a she said, he said situation. And given the timing and the thin skin that Warren showed, complaining that she was being trashed by Sanders supporters because they talked about the different types of voters who were supported by Warren and supported by Sanders, that's a very fair kind of comparison, or even mild criticism. But it certainly doesn't rise or descend to the level of trashing, and I don't consider it an attack. It is a contrast. And the script that offended Senator Warren starts off by saying, I like Senator Warren, she's my second choice. So this is fodder, and CNN, which I think has conducted the worst of the Democratic debates so far, they've got the franchise tonight along with the Des Moines Register. And you just know that this is going to be played, and repeatedly played, by the moderators. They are trying to divide the progressive wing of the party because they don't support a progressive. And where we saw them use John Delaney and then Amy Klobuchar as the more conservative wedge in the earlier debates that focused on the minutia of health care proposals. I expect that CNN will use Pete Buttigieg tonight to try to advance this line of division. The timing is very suspicious here. Warren offered these two items just a day or two before this Iowa debate, which is pretty critical, and more people will be watching than the earlier debates. And Sanders said, "It's sad that 3 weeks before the Iowa caucus, a year after that private conversation, staff who weren't in the room are lying about what happened. Do I believe a woman can win in 2020? Of course. After all, Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes in 2016. Faz Shakir, my old buddy and Sanders' campaign manager, has called on Warren to refute the accusation. We need to hear from her directly, he said Monday afternoon. But I know what she would say, that it is not true, that it is a lie." And so I wasn't in that room. I don't claim to know. But there are often candid conversations about who can win and what reason, what their strengths and weaknesses are. And Sanders describes it of having been in the context of how low Trump would go in attacking a female candidate. Not discussed is the Pocahontas tag and Warren's fumbling of that issue when she publicly announced her DNA test in 2019. And the offending comment that she said led Bernie's volunteers to trash her is so minor and insignificant. The script said that Warren's supporters are more highly educated, more affluent people who are going to show up and vote Democratic no matter what, and that would bring no new bases or new voter groups into the Democratic Party. I have often argued that Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who has appeal outside of the core of Democratic voters. Is that offensive to Senator Warren? Now, I see this as part of a broader assault on the candidacy of Bernie Sanders and the fears that moderate Democrats, corporate Democrats, and Clinton Democrats have. So we go to The Hill, which is this website in Washington where John Solomon has his perch. And in my view, they lean toward Trump and toward conservative and corporate interests. And in the same website where I got the poll numbers that I just quoted to you, and I picked them up from The Hill, when I clicked on Sanders hits highest support since August, well, this is the counterstrike. Democrats voice concerns over Sanders. The Democrats complaining about Sanders, some of whom have histories with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, argue that the rhetoric being employed by the Vermont senator in some cases goes too far in damaging his rivals. An unnamed Democratic strategist. He needs to stop. It's not helpful, and it actually hurts the party. It's like he didn't learn his lesson the last time. It's incredibly short-sighted and terrible. And what did he say to trigger this response? Well, he went to the LA Times and answered a question about what would happen if Trump faced Joe Biden. And Sanders said, "Joe Biden is a personal friend of mine, so I'm not here to attack him. But my God, if you're a Donald Trump and you got Biden as your opponent, having voted for the war in Iraq, having voted for these terrible, in my view, trade agreements, having voted for the bankruptcy bill, Trump will eat his lunch." Now, that's all about issues. It's not a personal attack on Joe Biden's hair plugs or his fondling of women. No, it's about the issues. That's what primary campaigns are all about. Then they cite the Warren claim that Bernie's people are trashing her. For balance, they offer a quote from Larry Cohen, a Sanders supporter. I don't see it any differently than Vice President Biden going after Medicare for all. It should be about the issues. And when we have differences and believe something is better, we should say so. And so who's going to be trotted out next? Well, likely a guy named Barack Obama. And Jim Messina, one of the brains behind Obama's re-election campaign in 2012, he's quoted as saying, "Warren and Sanders are competing for the same voters. It's inevitable as we get closer to actual voting that the campaigns will draw contrast with each other. That said, I'm skeptical that traditional negative campaigning works with these voters. These are hope voters who want a better world. That tends to make negative lines of attack more difficult." And I tend to agree with that. I think that this is going to hurt Senator Warren. I don't think many of Bernie Sanders' supporters believe that he is sexist. And there's a report in BuzzFeed today about how leaders of the Warren campaign are urging their supporters not to call him a sexist and to de-escalate this current little kerfuffle. But they started it, and now they don't want to pursue it. I think they've recognized the points of diminishing return, but they have landed the blow, and it will be effective to some extent. We have some hacking in the news today and a real change of policy at the NSA, America's spy sector, the National Security Agency. They made a big break from their past practice. And that practice, as confirmed by NSA whistleblowers like Bill Binney and Russell Tice, is that they exploited so-called day one vulnerabilities in software. And, for example, the NSA recently discovered a big flaw in Microsoft's Windows 10 operating system. In the past, they wouldn't have called Microsoft and said, "Hey, you got to fix this bug." They would have used it to their advantage and exploited it. And so by notifying Microsoft and enabling them to issue a patch, this is news. And even the Washington Post noticed this. They quote Ann Neuberger at NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate. "This is a change in approach by NSA of working to share, working to lean forward, and then working to really share the data as part of building trust." Wow. Sheryl Sandberg write that? Windows 10 is the most widely used system in government and business today. The discovery has been likened to a slightly less severe version of the Microsoft flaw that the NSA once weaponized by creating a hacking tool called Eternal Blue, which one former agency hacker said was like fishing with dynamite. The NSA used Eternal Blue for more than 5 years, but then they figured out it had been obtained by others. They notified Microsoft, and a month later, the shadow brokers released that NSA tool online as part of Vault 7. And I mentioned Vault 7 because built into Vault 7 was a hacking tool that permits the hacker to mislead the hacked by pretending to be somebody else. And so, by leaving Cyrillic script behind, by tipping Fancy Bear or Cozy Bear or Crazy Bear, these are taken as actual evidence by the so-called cybersecurity firms when often they are misleading traces, like breadcrumbs, left in order to blame somebody else. And now we have Russiagate 2.0. Here's the lead from The Guardian. Russian military hackers tried to steal emails from the Ukrainian energy firm where Hunter Biden had a seat on the board. The energy company Burisma Holdings was at the center of attempts by Trump last July to pressure Ukrainian authorities to announce an investigation into the Bidens. And now we are told that in November, Russian hackers were able to delve into servers at Burisma. Now, that's really all they are asserting. They don't have evidence of what they got into, whether they had manipulated data that's in there or simply copied it. But this has created a whole new firestorm in Washington and on cable news driven by Rachel Maddow. The report came from a California-based Silicon Valley company called Area 1 Security, and we'll talk about who they are in a moment. But this is an incredibly speculative report that never raises suspicions about other bad actors. Iran has a huge motivation right now to hack the United States. If you want to get away with something, you blame it on the Russians, because so many Americans are predisposed to believe that, because they have been listening to biased coverage and bullshit for over 3 years. And ask yourself, if you were able to hack into Burisma in November, what the hell did you expect to find? Incriminating evidence about Hunter Biden? I mean, it's not rational. But it feeds the conspiracy-minded Democrats and others who prefer to believe that the election of Donald Trump was the result of nefarious outside actors. Area 1 co-founder Blake Darsh, a former NSA official, said unpublished data gathered by his firm linked the operation to a specific officer in Moscow, whose identity he was unable to establish. Now, what the hell does that mean? They know what desk he sits at, but they don't know his name? This is similar to the specifics in the Mueller indictment that will never be heard in a trial court that is now treated as evidence. But this guy Darch went on to say that his company is 100% certain the GRU is behind the hacking. And what do they base it on? Well, it is strikingly similar to what American intelligence agencies say was Russia's hacking of emails from the Clinton campaign in 2016. That's not evidence. That's a similarity. Now, let me stipulate that all of this could be true. But my skepticism, I think, is deeply warranted. And when you look at the speculative language that is used here, the weasel words, it is not yet clear what the hackers found or precisely what they were searching for. But the experts say, yes, they're experts, the timing and scale of the attack suggests that the Russians could be searching for potentially embarrassing material on the Bidens. They could also be searching for information about how Burisma plans to distribute natural gas, what prices they're going to charge, or maybe they want to find out what kind of gas is flowing into Crimea. So I don't dismiss that the Russians hack wherever they can. But to ascribe motives based on the limited data that has been shared with the press so far is just insulting to our intelligence. And these people believe because they worked in the capital I intelligence community that they can peddle bullshit and stupid Americans are just going to accept it at face value. So we are in another hall of mirrors. And I looked up Area 1 Security. I looked at their website. They claim to be the phishing experts. They can prevent you from being phished. The company was incorporated in 2013 by Oren Falkowitz, Blake Darche, and Phil Syme, all of whom were formerly employed by the U.S. National Security Agency. They got their venture capital financing from Kleiner Perkins, Icon Ventures, Allegis Capital. It's a list of Silicon Valley money that doesn't include the CIA's venture capital firm, but many other of the heavy hitters. And you can expect Hillary Clinton had to chime in. Quote, Russians appear to be rerunning their 2016 hacking playbook, once again to benefit Donald Trump. Will the media play along again? Will the GOP open the door again? So we take the most sinister possible interpretation of the limited information we have, and off we go to another series of misleading conspiracy theories coming from media outlets and self-interested political entities and individuals. It's like they didn't learn a damn thing. And I've been holding on to this, I guess, for a couple of weeks now, because one of these reports I'm about to cite was published on January 3rd. And there's a reporter named Eric Wemple at the Washington Post. Now, this is a limited hangout operation because Wemple goes back and, based on the Inspector General's report, he takes a look at media errors, the false reports that surfaced during the Russiagate coverage. Now, this is hardly a deep dive. It is not exhaustive. He makes a couple of passing references to blunders by his own outlet, the Washington Post. But he's written a series of 8 accounts, 8 articles. And the one I have in my hand here is, Dear CNN, what parts of the Steele dossier were corroborated? And he reports on the breathless coverage that CNN supplied about the Steele dossier. And he says, yes, the dossier's passages on Russian meddling exist, but before Steele submitted his first memo to Fusion GPS, the Post had already reported in June of 2016 that Russian government hackers had infiltrated the computer systems of the DNC. The Steele report remained way behind public contemporaneous reporting on the hack and leak operation. Dossier deflating references such as this populate the Horowitz report. The FBI concluded, among other things, that although consistent with known efforts by Russia to interfere in the elections, much of the material in the Steele election reports, including allegations about Trump and members of his campaign, relied upon in the Carter Page FISA applications, could not be corroborated. Certain allegations were inaccurate or inconsistent with information gathered by the Crossfire Hurricane team. The limited information that was corroborated related to time, location, and title information, much of which was publicly available. And then Wemple lists specific CNN reports with the dates. Here's one. This is reporter Philip Mudd on March 26th of 18. That takes you back to the Steele dossier, the information collected by a former British intelligence officer about some of the allegations about the president's activities in Moscow. If that turns out to be true, and I think we have information that suggests the FBI has corroborated some of that, I could see a national security implication. And this is the kind of game that was played by the media outlets all through the Russiagate narrative. I've linked to Wemple's attack on CNN's coverage in the show file for today's podcast, and I've also linked to his analysis of Rachel Maddow's errors. It was published on December 26th, which is why most of us didn't notice it at the time. And so Maddow gets a pretty tough review regarding her coverage and her touting of the Steele dossier, her claims that it had been corroborated. And I think it is well-deserved if, how can I put it? This is a good start. Somebody needs to write a book about the false reporting of Rachel Maddow in her nightly telenovela that started in the fall of 2016 and really continues to this day, fueled by these new revelations, or so-called revelations. And here's something that Hillary Clinton and Rachel Maddow should be focusing on instead of piling on a new Russiagate scandal with very limited evidence. A Wisconsin appeals court today put on hold an order to immediately purge up to 200,000 names from the state's voter registration rolls, handing Democrats a victory of the moment. It put on hold a ruling from Monday in which a judge found the commission and its 3 Democratic members in contempt for not proceeding with removing the votes. And if you've listened to any of my interviews with Greg Palast, you know what voter caging is. Because you were a Democrat, they send you a postcard. And you have to return that postcard to maintain your voter registration. If you don't, they simply assume that you've moved, without checking with the DMV, without checking with the phone company or the utility, or anybody else like the state tax agencies. They don't want to know. They want to assume that you've moved so they can bump you off. And it's been a back and forth between judges, partisan judges in the state of Wisconsin. But the Supreme Court in the state declined to take the case, and that shifted the fight back to the appeals court, which sided with the election commissioners, and we'll see how all that stands. One other story today about elections and campaigns. Over at Who, What, Why, Gabriella Novello reports on the illegal coordination between super PACs that have been strengthened by the Citizens United Supreme Court decision and the candidates that they support. Now, the rules are very clear. There can be no coordination whatsoever. But Mitch McConnell, as cited in this report, blew through that in 2014 when he put up video clips that could be used in campaign ads by these outside groups on a website that they had access to. He didn't directly give it to them. He put it in a public location where they could grab it. And that's just one example of how these campaigns coordinate with the candidates in clear violation of the law. One of the Democrats who attempted this was Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington, who was a presidential candidate for a while. He used outside political spending to bolster his campaign. And just 7 residents of the state of Washington bankrolled his super PAC. So it does go on both sides of the aisle. And Trump, during the 2016 campaign, used the same media buyer as the National Rifle Association, which fueled my suspicions that maybe they did funnel money and maybe even money from offshore, including Russia, into the Trump campaign. Every day I pause for a minute to thank people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Teresa Paris has multiple subscriptions. Dick Atlee listens from Maine. There's Patrick Rainsberger, Brian Carey. I'm grateful to each of you, and I thank you for your support. And I want to invite others to join in because, we can't rely on the current subscribers to pay all the bills here. So if you're so inclined, visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You can hit the sign-up page and choose the level of support that's comfortable for you. And should you like to avoid PayPal, and I understand that, you can use my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, yesterday I cited the evolving, dissembling commentary from Trump and Mike Pompeo about the imminent attack that forced us to assassinate Iranian General Soleimani. Yesterday, NBC News reported that Trump signed his first essential death warrant for Soleimani months ago, last summer. And then the opportunity arose based on intelligence, we believe some supplied by Israel, for the killing by a drone strike at the Baghdad airport on January 2nd. And yesterday, I waltzed you through the shifting comments, and now Trump just tries to put it all to bed and tell you, well, don't look at my lies, because he said it doesn't really matter because of Soleimani's horrible past. The full tweet, the fake news media, their Democrat partners are working hard to determine whether or not the future attack by terrorist Soleimani was, quote, imminent, end quote, or not. And was my team in agreement? The answer to both is a strong yes, but it doesn't really matter because of his horrible past. Well, there are a lot of people around the world with a horrible past, Donnie boy. And you're not taking them out with drone strikes. And Barbara Lee, my favorite Democrat from California, put out a tweet. I'll say it again. The American people don't want another war based on false intelligence. And Trump, of course, repeated the claims that Democrats are not patriotic. When the Democrats try to defend Soleimani, it's a disgrace to our country. They can't do that. And let me tell you, it's not working politically very well for them. Well, when you're confronted by a demagogue, it is difficult because he lies compulsively with impunity, and 68 million Twitter followers appear to believe every word he tweets. I want to thank listener Linda Lewis, who sent me a column by Julia Conley at Common Grounds. She covers some of the same territory about the shifting claims. And following Trump's "it doesn't really matter" tweet, she copies a couple of other tweets. Trump says it doesn't really matter if Soleimani posed an imminent threat. If this is the case, then nothing matters. He can assassinate anyone, anywhere, and bring us to the brink of war for no reason and face no accountability. And another tweet, all that lying about the justification for killing Soleimani, and then Trump just tweets out the confirmation that they were all lying, but it doesn't matter, because when you govern under the doctrine of nothing matters, then nothing matters. In Iran, some top journalists who work for the state media have resigned in protest of the lies that they were fed, first by the military about the alleged deaths of 80 American soldiers in the Iranian strikes in Iraq, and then about the so-called technical problems that caused the crash of the Ukrainian passenger jet. Now, because the state media probably won't report that they have resigned in protest, I'm not sure how far this will go. But a state TV anchor named Jalara Jabari apologized on Sunday for having lied to you on Iranian TV for 13 years. Meanwhile, President Rouhani, trying to tamp down the protests, and I guess in response to these resignations, has called for a special court to examine the recent downing of that passenger plane. But the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has arrested the person it identified as having filmed the video of the missile attacking the plane, which is what caused people to doubt the military's initial denials that Iran was responsible. Not sure if that's going to be a credible investigation. And in Europe, Britain, France, and Germany have filed documents notifying Iran that they are triggering the dispute mechanism in the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. And this is because Iran has said that it will increase its uranium enrichment. The Western European signatories began a process that could eventually result in the snapback of sanctions. But by triggering this process, they hope to bring Iran back in line and bring them to the table, and maybe they imagine that the U.S. will show up at that same table. I'm not so sure. Elizabeth Warren has issued a statement that I support. She's calling on investigators at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to look into whether Senator Donald Trump's party pals at Mar-a-Lago were tipped off that the U.S. was planning to hit Iran and made stock investments, say, in the war companies and airplane manufacturers. I'd like to know the outcome of that particular investigation. Well, we've got better details on the plan for the impeachment trial in the Senate. Pelosi announced today that the House will vote tomorrow on a resolution appointing the House impeachment managers. Thursday is the day that they will ceremonially walk the articles of impeachment from the House to the Senate through the Capitol Rotunda. And Senate Leader McConnell told reporters he expects to engage in the preliminary trial activities like swearing in of senators. A laugh track should accompany that, in my opinion. And because of the MLK holiday on Monday, the actual trial with opening remarks should begin on Tuesday. And after those opening remarks is when they will vote on evidence and witnesses. And it does appear that there are enough votes to impose some witnesses against the will of McConnell, but that remains to be seen. Pelosi issued a statement, "The American people deserve the truth. The Constitution demands a trial." The House will now proceed with a vote on transmitting the articles of impeachment and naming impeachment managers on Wednesday, January 15th. And number 2 Democrat Steny Hoyer said that the vote will take place in the afternoon on Wednesday, but the procession could be delayed until Thursday, because of something going on in the rotunda. So by Thursday, the Senate will have the articles, and then the Chief Justice will sally forth to the Senate, where he will swear them in, and the opening of the actual trial is expected to begin on Tuesday. Mitch McConnell still pissing on the whole process. He said, we don't need no witnesses. If the existing case is strong, there's no need for the judge and the jury to reopen the investigation. If the existing case is weak, House Democrats shouldn't have impeached in the first place. Well, this is so deceptive, because Article 2 explicitly relates to obstruction. And it is that obstruction that requires the need for the Senate to flex some muscle and bring John Bolton and Don McGahn and a few other people over to testify. But Mitch likes those talking points, and he's not going to let go anytime soon. We know that Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, will be the lead attorney for the president, and that Jay Sekulow, the evangelist, pro-birth, extremist, former radio show host who has been a nominal advisor, legal advisor to the president over the last few years, and they float the possibility that Alan Dershowitz might join the team at some point. Our friend Steve Horn has a new story out at the Real News today. The House Democrats have passed out of committee what they are calling the Clean Future Act. And it's a watered-down climate change package that sets goals to have net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And truly, that's a goal that we desperately need to reach by 2030 or shortly thereafter, not 2050. And this is the parody of the New Green Deal. Neither one has any hope of getting passed by the Senate at this point. So these are aspirational, agenda-setting moves. But it's sad to see the Democrats negotiate with themselves and limit the goals and tactics that they will employ. Now, get this. There is a dispute in the Murdoch family. Rupert's son, James Murdoch, and James's wife, Catherine, issued a statement criticizing Daddy's businesses for their ongoing denial of the climate crisis as the wildfires continue to burn in Australia, which was where the whole Murdoch empire started. So I'm happy to see them pissing on each other. And Daddy Murdoch, Sir Keith Rupert, he has enabled his toadies in the News Corp's Australian newspapers to attack climate change advocates or activists as alarmist. That is amazing. Remember what they did when Rome burned? BlackRock, the world's largest money manager, will make sustainability and climate risks a key tenet of its investing strategy. BlackRock Chairman and Chief Executive Larry Fink has said that they are going to divest from coal and other carbon-based energy sources. Donald Trump is doing it again. After absconding with a couple of $1 billion for the wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for, he's announced that they are going to increase their larceny from the Defense Department budgets and divert an additional $7.2 billion in this current fiscal year. And because the Democrats were so feckless in fighting the last theft, we can expect this one to go much more smoothly. And finally, today, the two popes are fighting. Benedict, the one who retired, is criticizing Francis through a book that's been published by a third party. And this is so hypocritical of Benedict. when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, he presided over the cover-ups of the pedophile scandal in the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't say that removing the celibacy rule will entirely change the culture of this criminal fraternity that has covered for each other for so long. But for God's sake, the guy who's got his fingerprints on the cover-up is saying, oh, no, Francis, please don't do that. You can't lift the celibacy rule. It's been so... Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast, putting up with my ranting and raving. You're free to share this all over the place. It's on YouTube, and I am Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.